everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a special interview with Paul Gazelka. And Paul is the running to become candidate for the Republican Party for governor of Minnesota. Is that correct?
Yes, I was the leader of the Senate the last 5 years, the Republican leader, but on September 8th, I threw my hat in the ring and said, I'm running for governor. We need to take our state back.
Okay. Now, give us a little background, a little bit where you're from, and how did you become Senate Majority Leader?
So I wasn't even looking to be in politics. I'm a business owner in the Brainerd area. I have an insurance agency, but I'm from Virginia, Minnesota, and I started my insurance agency in Madison, Minnesota, which is western Minnesota, promoted up to Bemidji, Minnesota, and that's where I traveled all of northwest Minnesota, all through this area in the 90s. And then the last 25 years, I've had my insurance agency again in Brainerd. So that's what I was doing. My wife and I, we married a long time, now 39 years, 5 kids. But out of the blue, the state representative at the time called me up, wanted to get together. I had not been in politics, and he recruited me to run to be a legislator. And that's how I got in. And so then for the last 5 years, I've been the leader of the Senate. And again, I wasn't even looking for that. Our minority leader lost, but we took the majority, and we needed a leader, and I said, I'll do it.
Wow. Okay. All right. That's interesting. Now, I've got a host of topics that we're going to go through in this interview, and, I think a lot of things that are just on people's minds about what we're facing today, not only as a state but as a country, and obviously what's happening in Minnesota is happening generally nationwide. Yeah. And so there's just a wide range of things. So obviously probably the number one thing on people's mind is COVID. And as we're speaking today, the Supreme Court has just now put a stay banning the mandate for small business owners with 100 employees or more either showing a vaccination and or being tested weekly. So, weigh in on that. What is your thought on mandates and that right now?
So I always said that the virus was serious, particularly if you were over 70. It's just that Tim Walz and the Democrats and across the country really cracked down on everyone in a way they should have never done that. I never would have closed the schools. I would have never closed small businesses. I never would have closed churches. I think washing your hands, covering your cough, having some distance, some of those things were helpful. Suggesting a mask, I think, was fine, but it was when they forced people to get a mask and they're forcing people to get vaccinated. That's what people are frustrated about. In the Senate, where I had control, that's the only place there wasn't a mask mandate. We didn't have a mask mandate in the Senate because I had control there. And as governor, that's how I would have handled it. Republican governors around the country, in Florida or South Dakota or other places, they were far more trusting of their people to make the right choices, and the results are almost exactly the same as far as number of tragic deaths, number of hospitalizations. But where they're much better off is their kids are better educated, their small businesses are healthier, and the people are happier. So I would have done it much different.
Right, and that is one thing that has been a very stark difference in the response to this. So now a little closer to home, again, as we speak, literally, St. Paul and Minneapolis has just implemented the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's that you either have to show vaccination status or you can show a negative test. Is that right, to get into the restaurants now?
All I've seen is that you have to show the vaccination. I didn't see the negative testing.
I could be wrong on that too.
They continue to go down the wrong path. And what I would say is, look at the numbers in Wisconsin. The courts prevented their governor from shutting down the businesses, from forcing people to wear masks. The numbers are almost exactly the same. And so this is a serious virus. And Omicron is far less lethal, but much more contagious. So we have a lot of people in the hospitals, but it doesn't work, what they're trying to do. Both Tim Walz, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, all got vaccinated, all got boosted, and they still got COVID. And so when they're trying to say, only if you get vaccinated can you come in here, that's not going to solve anything.
Right, and that's where there's been that, in my mind with COVID, a bit of a disconnect from logic. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but whether you've gotten the vaccination or not, you can still spread it, and you can still get it. So where is the difference? What am I seeing or what are they seeing that I'm not seeing?
Well, that's the point. And in the first month of it, I was supportive of the governor making some of the decisions, getting PPP, that was the equipment for the masks and all the different things. But over time, you could see that the data was showing that if you were older, that's where it was really risky. And if you were younger, under 20, there was very little risk. And yet they kept moving ahead with all of these things that really frustrated the people. And people wanted, telling me, end these emergency powers. And we voted many, many times to end the emergency powers in the Senate. We passed it. We had a 1-vote majority in the Senate. But the House Democrats would not pass it because it became political, and so they defended their Democrat governor. In the end, however, even the Democrats in the House agreed with me to end emergency powers against Tim Walz's wishes.
Okay, all right, and that was again another interesting scenario. Another topic. And I think in a lot of people's minds is election integrity. Mm-hmm. I don't know of a person that doesn't want to just have free and fair and honest elections. And so speak to that in particular in Minnesota. Obviously nationwide there's probably a host of problems, but what about Minnesota? Are you confident in our election system?
So we're one of a couple handfuls of states that don't have voter ID for voting. And we've tried to pass it, I think, 3 times. The first one was in 2011 as a constitutional amendment, and then as recent as this last year. But every time Tim Walz and the Democrats in the House say no. And you have to wonder why. I mean, they say we're disenfranchising voters, but we said we will pay for an ID for anyone that cannot afford it. It's not about that. It's just that the elections, the way they handled this last time, everyone got a mail-in ballot. And then people did work to collect those mail-in ballots. And that was where I think most of the problems were. We don't know who actually voted on many of those mail-in ballots. They go back to a person, but it's hard to tell if somebody collected those ballots, and it's hard to tell who put their name in that oval. And so that's where I don't think it's fair. We know that the big tech companies filtered out stories. That's not fair. We know that the media often leans left, and that makes it harder for a conservative on the Republican side. But the good news is we can win anyway. In Minnesota, our Senate Republican majority under my leadership won. We won back-to-back majorities. Everybody else lost. We still won. So we can still win. And then Youngkin, the candidate and now governor in Virginia, he won. And so nothing has changed, but the public has changed. They are very, very frustrated with what Democrats are doing.
Okay. All right, let's move on to a little bit. Another topic for people is we keep seeing these inflation numbers come out. And, I just feel like, what are we doing wrong? Why is inflation just suddenly kind of rearing its ugly head or after, we're talking, I think, 40-year highs in inflation and that type of thing. So, or 30-year highs maybe.
40.
Or 40-year highs. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what are we doing wrong, or what has changed so drastically, literally in the last 10 to 12 months?
So there was 3 federal stimulus packages. Trump did one, and I was already concerned that could cause inflation. But then Biden did at least 2 more. And printing all that extra money and pushed it into the economy is why we have inflation. Minnesota got about $20 billion of extra money, and people are just spending that. But eventually you have to pay for that, and you pay for it with inflation. And so somebody showed me a picture of a large bag of mixed lettuce, and it was almost $7. And gas, almost $4 in some places. And so people are very frustrated, and it's going to take a number of years for that to settle out. But we've got to stop printing money we don't have, stop spending money we don't have. Otherwise, it's going to get really out of control.
Okay, so that brings me to another point. So you had mentioned that $20 billion came to the state of Minnesota. And was that under kind of like a COVID relief or stimulus, or what was that?
So it was very complicated to find because it went from the federal government directly to nonprofits, directly to local governments, directly to all various groups. Some of it went to the state, and I didn't find out till May of last year. So think about that, almost 9 months or so of getting money to really begin to see where it was all coming from. And it's hard to track it. I mean, it's just like they they flushed it into the system, and I think there's going to be a lot of abuse. We're going to try to follow back and look at how the money was spent. Some of it, I think, was helpful. When they shut down the businesses, they needed a way to survive.
Yep.
I don't think they should have shut them down, but once they did, and so we had what's called Paycheck Protection Program. The federal government didn't tax that. Minnesota, under the Democrats, were going to tax that. We were going to be one of like 5 states that said we're going to tax it, but I was able to get that tax exempt in Minnesota. That's where $1 billion of it went, was helping those small businesses.
Okay, and my business did benefit from that, but it was that same thing where we were deemed essential, but unfortunately, all of our business relies on all other businesses through advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly when a business either shuts down or is operating at a fraction of their capacity, they might think, hey, I don't know that I can advertise when I'm closed. So certainly they cut their advertising, and we saw a very quick decline in revenue. So it was a very big domino effect that I don't know that everybody understood how it was going to impact, even though even certain businesses were closed. It affected everyone.
Yeah, and so the first month we were trying to figure out what to do, and I remember the moment because I was the leader of the Senate, the highest ranking Republican, and I remember the governor saying, I'm going to lock down everyone. And I said, Governor, that is a huge mistake. I said, the danger is if you're over 70. That's where it's clear that people are at risk. But I said, you're not weighing out the economic impact to the individual's lives. You're not weighing out the mental health problems. You're not weighing out what the problems they're going to have in school. And he went forward anyway because he had emergency powers. And then with the small business, it wasn't big businesses. It was the small businesses that they hurt when you have less people coming together. And I remember then he said he started fining them $10,000 and pulling their licenses, when we thought the statute for emergency powers said $1,000 and a misdemeanor. And there were court cases, but the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, and the courts that we have let him do that. And so just a lot of frustrations, but all of that really hurt our economy, hurt the individual, hurt their life savings, hurt kids in their education. People were not allowed to go in churches. All of these decisions were Tim Walz as the emergency power, I would say, dictator. And I remember the moment when he got some pressure and he said, okay, bars can have 50 people, and at the exact same time, churches can have 10 people. I mean, there's no science in that.
Right.
And the benefit of divided government and government with a House, Senate, and governor is you can push back on each other and say, no, that's too far. No, that doesn't make sense. And it helps you get to a better place. But if you're one person with all the power, you make a lot of mistakes.
Right. And that might be a prime example of my decoupling of logic to this, where, certainly you can get 50 people in a bar together, but not 10 people in a church, that type of thing. There were constant examples like that drove me crazy.
I'll tell you what my wife said when we heard that. She said, okay, let's do church in bars. We can go there, have 50 people and sing, because it was just it's a terrible period, and we're not yet through it, but I think finally people are coming to the grips with the fact that we have to get used to living with this. I've been saying this for well over a year, that I think this is going to come around and around like the flu virus does. People say they're going to stop it. You can't stop it, but we need to be thoughtful about what we do. If people should talk to their doctors and choose whether they're going to get the vaccine or not, but those need to be choices that people get to make.
Okay. Let's touch on real quick education. So I've got a fifth and a sixth grader, so they were kind of going through this between third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, the on again, off again. I've watched their test scores, and I forget if it's called the STAR test. They show you, and originally the kids were a little ahead, Mari in reading, AJ in math, and after the lockdowns and closings and everything else, they're getting closer to like their grade level rather than being ahead.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of assuming the same thing happens. If you're at grade level, you might be behind, or if you're behind, you're further behind. And so tell us a little bit about education. And, I feel like that we're going to have some type of long-term repercussions of this, but and it's still some school districts are battling it.
Yeah. So, and that's where I said we cannot close down the schools. If you have a flu epidemic in a school, they usually shut it down for a couple of weeks and then move forward again. And I could see some of that happening with COVID, but there was very, very little risk of COVID for kids. Certainly for the teachers, there's a little more risk, and if you were an older teacher, then we needed to think through what do we do there. But I knew that this would be harmful to them. And parochial schools across the state, across the country, were still open. Other states had their schools open. Other countries had their schools open because they knew that even though there was risk, the cost to the next generation was too great. And then they did not want to test. They didn't want to test this year. They wanted to just say, let's not test. I said, we're testing. We need to see what really happened with this. And so that's the terrible consequences of this big virus and how it was handled. One silver lining is when parents were learning what their kids were learning at home, they're on their iPads and they're learning, yeah. They're saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about with our history? And there's a movement across the country. Some want to change our history standards. And in Minnesota, after the next election, if we have a Democrat governor still, they don't want to talk about George Washington, World War I, World War II, the Holocaust. They want to talk about equities and white privilege and some of these other things. And we need to push to hear all of our history. We shouldn't be afraid to look at our flaws, what we learned from them. I think that's good. But unfortunately, too much of that is happening now and not talking about our triumphs. America has many triumphs. So when kids graduate, they should feel like they're citizens of the greatest country in the world. They shouldn't feel like they're ashamed of who we are. We have accomplished many great things and overcome many great things. But so there's a real push now. More and more families, parents are getting involved in their local school districts and saying, you can't teach this. And in fact, there's legislation that I'll be working on for curriculum transparency, that parents have a right to see what's going on in their schools. It can't be hidden from them, and they can't charge so much to get it that parents can't be involved. Parents need to be involved.
Okay. No, and it has been an issue also. Okay. So we talked a little bit about your background as far as how you got into politics, mm-hmm. and what's changed in the 12 to so years that you've been in politics. Have you changed your thought process or your leadership skills, or what's changed from the day you started to now?
I would say I listen a lot more because you come in as a politician, you've been in a particular area, and that's really all you know, and suddenly now, like for me, I lived in rural Minnesota almost my whole life, listening to people that live in Minneapolis and St. Paul and some of the issues they have to deal with, or the suburbs. And so I would say I'm much more thoughtful about issues. I want to learn about them. But my compass always points a true north direction. I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, and I'm a Republican, so everything kind of fits within that. And so that gives me my guiding direction. But not every issue is black and white. I mean, it's so interesting, all the different, you think you know it, and then they say, well, what about this side of it? And then becoming leader, I no longer just represented District 9, which is Wadena, Long Prairie, Little Falls, kind of that area. Now I really represented the whole state. And so that really forced me to spend time in Minneapolis and St. Paul and learn some of their issues. And I'm from the Iron Range, but I drove up to a blue-collar union hall for Hibbing Taconite, and it was so interesting that they had once pretty much been all Democrat, and now they saw that the Democrat Party is not interested in mining, so we had a chance to have a great conversation. So that's more than anything, I listen a lot more. The people have a lot of answers if I'll just listen.
Okay. So, here's just an off-the-beat question, too. So, for example, these mandates in St. Paul and Minneapolis, could the governor step in and say, no, you can't do that to your cities? Or do the mayors have that much power to be able to do that in their cities?
Yeah, we tried to pass uniform labor standards so that some of these things could only be done at a statewide level, but they can be done at the local level, and Minneapolis and St. Paul are doing that. As far as with the governor, I would rather have with a virus allowing counties to make some of the decisions on if they're going to close things down. For example, when Tim Walz shut down the entire state, there were parts of the state where there was no epidemic, and yet everything was shut down. And so I'd rather have it local, but I am concerned about Minneapolis and St. Paul and what they're doing. It's if their businesses continue to fail, are they going to be asking the state then for help for something that they were really a part of?
Right, right. Okay. I was just kind of curious because I've just seen it seems like some other governors have been pretty tough on whether it's the federal government maybe trying to do things in their state or, maybe local school districts that were trying to do some things and they were really pushing back as governor. And so I just was wondering exactly what the extent of those powers are.
Yeah, and I would rather have local control on most things, like when they want to change the education history standards. As governor, I will stop those changes at the governor's level, at the state level. That pushes that fight to our local communities. I'd rather have it that way than the state making a move that many of us don't think is right.
Right. Okay. Well, Paul, I want to thank you for your time tonight. It was very interesting. If somebody would want to kind of get more information, or what's the best way to follow you and get more information as you're on the campaign trail, so to speak?
It's Gazelka.com, but I want to talk about one more issue.
Okay, yep.
I mean, because I think the most important issue in this election statewide is going to be public safety. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, they hit all-time murder rate highs. Carjackings, more than one every day. I mean, it's out of control. And over the last couple of years, too many people on the other side of the aisle have wanted to defund the police or take away their tools. And this is the biggest issue. I'm grateful that I've already been endorsed by the Highway Patrol. The chiefs of police gave me their Legislator of the Year. The Minnesota Peace and Police Officers gave me their Legislator of the Year. And this is the issue that matters to all of Minnesota. It's really the Twin Cities that we have to take our streets back, but nobody wants to go down to the Twin Cities. They don't want to go to a Vikings game. They don't want to go to theater. Commerce, people don't want to drive through the city. So it's really affecting the whole state, and this will be my number one issue in the campaign. We have to be tougher on crime. We've got to give the police the tools. If the prosecutors, which are literally not even prosecuting, won't do it, then we need to pass legislation with minimum standards. Judges are not giving proper sentences, but that comes down to the governor picking good judges. And so this is a major issue, and I just didn't want to let it go before we finished. So go to Gazelka.com. There people can say, I want to be part of what you're doing. I want to join you. I want to be a delegate. February 1st for Republicans, for Republicans and Democrats, is where you show up at all your local community centers around the whole state, and you show up and you say, I want to be a delegate. And those people get to do a straw poll vote. It doesn't count, but it says, who would you want the Republican governor to be? But eventually, from those delegates, May 13th, they choose who the Republican candidate is for governor. And so if you really want to be involved in the process on the Republican side, be a delegate. If you don't know how to do it, go to Gazelka.com and we'll help. It's Gazelka, in case people want to know.
All right. We'll get it on the screen for people too. Okay. Well, no, again, a pleasure. And you know what? I did have crime as one of my topics, and I forgot to ask you about that, so I'm glad you brought it up. Because that is, in rural areas, I think we've done a better job, maybe just kind of being a steady hand. But from what we see from the outside, we can't believe some of the things that they're putting up with now when it comes to crime, and it is kind of scary.
I get calls or people contact me on my website, and they say they've been a Democrat their whole life, but they don't feel like they get it. They don't. The Minneapolis police, they had 800 police officers before the death of George Floyd, and they were asking for 400 more. That means 1,200. They're down to around 500. So they're not being able to do their job. I mean, it's actually scary. I carry at the Capitol. We have to pay attention, but we have to take our streets back. But it will affect all of us.
Yeah. No. Very good. I'm glad you brought that up. All right. Well, I want to thank you again for this time. And
can I bring up one more?
You bet.
So one of the things that they bring up, they call me a career politician. Think about that. But I tell people, look, I did not get in this until I was 45 years old. I still have my insurance agency, but I think experience matters. If you're going to govern, you have to know something. And being leader of the Senate for the last 5 years, having to do 3 of the negotiating with the $50 billion budgets really matters. If you're going to put out a budget as governor and you want to save the state, you want to save the taxpayer, you got to know where to look. And so I've got that experience both in the private sector and the public sector, and I just don't think that means I'm a career politician. It just means I have a lot of expertise.
All right. No, interesting. No, that's an interesting twist because I think people are worried about folks that get into politics and then they spend their whole life there and they don't know anything outside of it. And so then consequently, oh, this is the way it's always been done, and it continues to be always done that way, and never a fresh set of eyes looked on it. So
Agreed.
okay. All right. Well, Paul, again, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.